faithfully delivering value by interpreting great books from around the world. Hey there, this is Sally from Sally Talks Books. Today, we're diving into the book titled Neither Raw Nor Cooked, and its subtitle is The Civilized History of Fermented Foods. Food is essential for life. In what we eat every day, we have raw foods and cooked foods. On top of that, there's food that's neither raw nor cooked. It's fermented. The fermented foods are all over our daily meals. Think bread, buns, yogurt, cheese, coffee, tea, wine, bacon, pickles, and even seasonings like soy sauce and vinegar. They're all fermented. All right, so how did fermented foods get started? And what kinds of traditional fermented foods are out there? What part have fermented foods played in human history, and how do we get a scientific grasp on fermentation? Today's book, Neither Raw Nor Cooked, will give us the answers. The author, Marie-Claire Friedrich, is a French food journalist who spent years researching to write this history of fermented foods. In her book, she takes us through weird and wonderful fermented foods across history and explores how they've shaped human civilization. And coming up, I'll cover the book's key points through three big questions. First up, how did fermented foods come to be? Second, how are fermented foods tied to human civilization? And third, how does modern science view fermentation? We'll start with the first question. How did fermented foods originate? Fermented foods are made by harnessing microbes. Their enzymes turn food's organic stuff into good new things, making it softer, longer lasting, full of nutrients, and tasty. Scientists think we've been eating fermented foods for roughly 1.9 million years, way before we learned to cook with fire, by about 1.4 million years. So, what proof comes from shifts in early human teeth fossils? Way back in prehistoric times, our ancestors had strong molars. They munched on hard, chewy foods that took ages to eat. Studies say early humans spent 48% of their time eating, but we modern folks only spend about 4.7% of our day on meals. But around 1.9 million years ago, early humans spent way less time eating, and their chewing teeth got smaller. This change was probably because the food got softer and no longer so hard to chew. However, humans only mastered fire and started cooking food about 500,000 years ago. That means before taming fire, humans must have found another way to soften food: fermentation. Fermentation is an accidental natural phenomenon. Humans accidentally observed this process, marveled at its wonder, and then started actively repeating fermentation. In short, by the end of the Paleolithic era, humans gradually mastered food fermentation techniques. Archaeologists guess that the earliest fermented food was likely fermented meat, because at the end of the Paleolithic era, agriculture hadn't developed yet, and people mainly survived by hunting. And during hunting, people saw some animals bury prey in the ground for later eating and copied them. They found that storing the meat for a few days until slightly spoiled made it softer, easier to eat, and tastier. This method of storing meat until slightly spoiled before eating was one of the earliest fermentation techniques humans learned. After an animal dies, gut bacteria in the carcass multiply, producing enzymes that cause fermentation, breaking down proteins into amino acids, which softens the meat and makes it tastier. This process is similar to our modern meat aging technique. The spoiled gut bacteria aren't toxic, but if meat is stored too long and spoilage continues, it eventually produces toxins that cause poisoning. End quote. Until the 20th century, this method of storing meat to spoil was still popular in many parts of the world. The Mandan people, indigenous to North America, would search underwater for drowned bison carcasses during flood seasons. After the floods, they'd hang the bison meat until it rotted halfway, then take it down. Australian Aboriginals liked hanging pieces of meat on branches until they swelled, turned green, and made sizzling sounds from gases, then took them down. They'd soak the meat pieces in running water for 2 days, wrap them in leaves, then cook them in a mud oven making the cooked meat delicious. If you think eating rotten meat was a preference of indigenous people, you're wrong. European gourmets considered almost completely rotten pheasants a delicacy until the 19th century. When preserving pheasants, they kept the feathers and entrails. When the pheasant's belly turns green and the head detaches easily when lifted, it's perfectly rotten. Besides letting meat ferment through storage alone, people also dry meat with salt or spices or soak it in brine to preserve it. According to legend, Bayonne ham, one of the world's top 10 hams, was born when a pig fell into a naturally salty stream and soaked until edible. People discovered this cured pig, tasted its unique flavor, copied the method, and through practice created today's premium ham. Besides curing with salt, vinegar can pickle meat too. Greeks love pickling meat or fish with vinegar. All right, that's the first type of fermented food we covered. Fermented meats.
Next, let's discuss fermented vegetables, breads, and drinks.
First, fermented vegetables. The book suggests people formed the habit of eating pickled cabbage and lacto-fermented veggies by seeing carnivores eat partially digested grass from herbivores' stomachs. Cabbage, radish, mustard greens, peppers, cucumbers work well. Soak them fully in brine or salted rice water to ferment into pickled veggies. This fermentation method is called lactofermentation. Lactic acid bacteria on veggies multiply fast in oxygen-free settings, producing lactic acid, while brine stops harmful microbes to prevent rot. In Southeast and South Asia, lacto-fermenting with green lemons and peppers makes curry. Salting bananas, eggplants, cauliflower, peppers, garlic, cucumbers, tomatoes, plus spices and sugar creates popular chili sauces. In East Asia, soybeans are a common fermenting base. Chinese use fermented soybeans to make soy sauce. Japanese make miso and spicy beans with it. Now that fermented fruits and veggies are covered, let's talk fermented breads, like flatbreads. Roasted grains, crushed and mixed with water, make a liquid paste. Now pour it onto heated stones to make flatbreads. Or, if the batter or dough is forgotten and ferments, rising up, baking it creates fluffy bread. People often save a small piece of fermented dough to inoculate new dough the next day. Well, the principle here is alcohol fermentation. It's the base for alcoholic drinks and the heart of bread fermentation. Yeast from fruit peels and the air breaks down starch and sugars in dough, creating carbon dioxide. Alcohol and other aromatic compounds make the dough puff up, and when heated, the alcohol just evaporates away. Oh, people also use other starters like beer or yogurt. Greeks and Romans turned grape juice into starters too. During grape harvest season, folks mix white grape juice that sat for 3 days with millet or bran, knead it, and shape it into little cakes. Dry it in the sun. This yeast keeps for a year. Fermented drinks? Yeah, they're a big deal in fermented foods too. The earliest fermented drink was probably mead from honey. Imagine a honeycomb dropping from a tree, soaked in rain for days. Boom, fermentation starts. People tried it, loved it, and sealed liquid honey in sheepskin bags to copy the fermenting process. Besides pure mead, there's mixed mead with berry juices, grains, honey, and milk. Over time, grain fruit blends gave way to pure grain or fruit drinks. Think Chinese rice wine, Japanese sake. Outside East Asia, beer and wine took the world by storm. Kumis, made from mare's milk, is fermented by airborne bacteria in a stomach pouch, giving a cool, tart, bubbly drink. Kumis has a cousin, camel milk wine. Oh, and cheese and yogurt? Big fermented dairy players. Nomads eat cheese every meal, sometimes as a staple, sometimes grated or shredded. Okay, that wraps up part 1. Way back 1.9 million years ago, humans figured out fermentation to soften food. Fermentation works on meat, veggies, or bread, changing taste and boosting shelf life. Plus, folks mastered brewing wine, beer, and making yogurt, cheese. Fermentation's been with human civilization from the start. So, what's the relationship between fermented foods and human civilization?
That's our second question today.
Overall, fermented foods play 3 roles in human civilization. First, they act as civilization's catalyst. For Greeks and Romans,
Eating bread and wine distinguished civilized people. Homer's epics call humans bread eaters.
In Asia and Africa, beer was believed to help humans transcend animal status. West African myths tell of creator gods teaching women to brew sorghum beer and cook porridge. After eating these foods, humans lost their tails and fur, becoming truly human.
Why did fermented foods mark humanity's entry into civilized society?
The author argues our craving for fermented foods drove plant domestication, ending nomadic life and starting settled civilization. Take grains like barley, wheat, corn, rice. They were first domesticated despite flaws. Hard to harvest, small yields, tough husks. Pre-domestication, American teosinte had grains under 10 grams. Despite this, greens were domesticated before plants with bigger fruits or more leaves. Scientists believe humans made fermented foods from wild grains even during hunting and gathering eras. Native Americans used teosinte stalks and leaves to brew beer and fermented drinks. To get more fermented foods, they domesticated teosinte into corn. Similarly, wild grape winemaking preceded grape cultivation. Thus, fermented foods drove grain domestication and agricultural development. In animal husbandry, new archaeology suggests dairy consumption drove early goat and cow domestication. At a Neolithic site in France, researchers found many young animal bones. Dental analysis showed these young were killed when nursing ended. Crucially, nursing cows stop producing milk if calves die early. So to get milk, people kept calves with mothers until nursing ended. This method of raising goats and sheep for milk was also found in ancient Mediterranean and Middle Eastern regions. So did early humans drink milk straight or eat it fermented? Ancient DNA studies show adults couldn't produce lactase then, meaning lactose intolerant. So milk caused diarrhea, but fermented yogurt and cheese were digestible. Thus, humans likely ate yogurt and cheese before drinking pure milk and domesticating cows. It was demand for fermented dairy that drove livestock domestication and pastoralism. Okay, so we've covered how fermented foods advanced agriculture and pastoralism, ushering in civilization. Throughout history, fermented foods also became bridges to the divine, starring in festivals and rituals, and fermentation's unpredictable, full of chance and mystery. Any change can ruin it. So people credited it to magic or gods, making fermented foods sacred. Indian myth tells how gods and demons churned a milk ocean for 1,000 years to create butter. See, even gods and demons struggled. No wonder humans found it tough. So butter became sacred in India. Butter was seen as divine gift, honored as holy oil. It symbolized fertility, abundance, rebirth, and pure inspiration. In Christian stories, Jesus turned water considered unclean into wine. He multiplied bread and at the Last Supper turned wine and bread into his blood and flesh. So wine became blood of God. In Mexican myth, the creator god convinced fertility goddess Mayoel to sacrifice herself. Her ground bones and blood sprouted agave. The god collected agave sap to ferment into pulque, an early tequila. Because of the goddess's sacrifice, pulque was born. Pulque contains the goddess's flesh, blood, and divinity, making it the wine of life. Due to its sacred status, fermented food became part of important festivals and celebrations. It served as offerings to deities and attended key rituals in ordinary lives, like births, weddings, funerals, and so on. For instance, when Henry IV of France was born, his grandfather rubbed garlic and Jurançon wine on his lips, hoping for strength and health. And fear his town. In Shaoxing, China, there's a custom. If a daughter is born, plant a tree. Bury a jar of glutinous rice brewed daughter's red wine under the tree. When the daughter marries, the tree becomes furniture, and the wine becomes dowry.
It's served to guests at the wedding feast.
At the feast, there's a dish called myeongnan, made from pollock roe fermented with chili. Roe symbolizes fertility, enhanced by fermentation. Thus, this dish is a blessing for the couple. Funerals also feature fermented foods, like bread symbolizing life. Since the Neolithic era, Europeans buried bread and millstones, sometimes burning bread with the body, sometimes pouring ashes onto a millstone, symbolizing flour. It's reborn as bread, symbolizing life beyond death. In Orthodox countries, bread is sacrificed throughout Easter with warm crumbs sprinkled on the deceased. They believe steam from bread helps souls escape. Fermented drinks are also tomb staples. Since the Paleolithic era, people placed fermented drinks in tomb corners for the dead to take to the afterlife. Tombs in China, Egypt, Central Asia, Northern Europe, and the Caucasus have yielded large amounts of beer or wine. In Egypt alone, 4000 BCE tombs had over 700 jars of Palestinian wine, totaling 4,500 liters. Drinking at funeral feasts was essential. Per archaeological records, a 750 BCE Greek tomb held 157 vessels for funeral feasting. Some wine bowls had thick yellowish residue with honey, barley, and grapes, showing people drank well at farewell meals. Today, fermented foods play a third role, symbols of identity, belonging, and cultural heritage. Their unique flavors inspire both obsession and revulsion. Truly, one person's delicacy is another's poison. Canadian Inuit relish seal meat sun-dried for a year, while Europeans find its decay revolting. Japanese eat natto, sticky fermented soybeans, with nearly every meal. But outside Japan, many can't stomach its unusual texture. Shared love for fermented foods creates bonds and camaraderie within communities. Locals often challenge tourists or newcomers with these foods as cultural tests. In Mexico's Tabasco, there's pozol, a drink of fermented cocoa and maize. A local proverb says, "If newcomers enjoy pozol, they'll settle here."
Icelanders slyly recommend hokarl to unsuspecting visitors. This shark meat buried in sand for months develops soft, palatable flesh.
But its putrid smell always deters guests. In France, foreigners praising camembert cheese earn instant respect. Remember, Americans once called its aroma corpse-like. Fermented foods' cultural importance stems partly from their nutritional and medicinal value. First, fermentation makes foods more digestible. Grains like barley, corn, wheat have nutritional flaws, low protein and amino acids and vitamins, but high phytic acid. Phytic acid in seeds binds minerals, blocking calcium and iron absorption, but fermentation breaks it down. Second, fermentation neutralizes toxins. Fresh Greenland shark is poisonous because urea stays in its muscles. Traditionally, it's buried in pits or beaches under heavy stones for fermentation. After 6 to 12 months, when the urea dissipates, they dig it up, cut it into strips, hang it to dry, resulting in slightly spoiled, stinky hackarl. When eating it, you gotta peel off the brown crust and cut it into small pieces. The pufferfish is toxic too. Its ovaries and liver contain deadly tetrodotoxin. Poisoning causes paralysis, then suffocation, with no antidote.
Pufferfish ovaries are a traditional delicacy in Japan.
Japanese ferment them in rice bran for 3 years to remove toxins, but science still can't explain how, and we don't know how this method was discovered. How was this fermentation method discovered? Finally, fermented foods serve as medicine. Hippocrates famously said, "Let food be thy medicine." In ancient Greece and Rome, fish sauce and fish liver healed illnesses. Fish sauce, fermented from fish guts and blood and salt, was called liquid gold, treating burns, crocodile bites, ulcers, dysentery, and oral or ear infections.
Doctors even prescribed it for rheumatism and lethargy.
In Europe, fermented flying fish cured diseases or boosted health. A Dutch proverb says, "Where flying fish thrive, doctors grow bored." Fermented flying fish is protein and vitamin rich with unsaturated fats, lowers cholesterol and heart disease risk. Sweden sells capsules with freeze-dried fermented flying fish powder for stomach ailments. Ancient Egyptians used fermented veggies, seaweed juice, and honey medicinally. In Poland, sauerkraut juice disinfects small wounds, ulcers, and enteritis. Mexico's pulque stimulated milk production and treated kidney disease. Vinegar, mentioned in the Bible, treated infections and wounds.
Greek doctors used honey-mixed apple cider vinegar for colds or coughs, effective against epidemics too.
Ancient drinking water was often polluted by waste or spoiled by heat. Contaminated water easily caused infections. People added small amounts of vinegar or wine to disinfect water, or fermented it into beer or wine for safe drinking. Even today, fermented foods remain medically valuable. Japanese miso aids digestion, reduces fever, detoxifies, boosts immunity, and even counters radiation. After Nagasaki's 1945 atomic bombing, survivors suffered cancer, leukemia, and radiation burns. With scarce food, they survived on brown rice, miso, pickled plums, and squash. Doctors even applied miso paste to severe burns when medicines were unavailable, successfully healing wounds. Later Japan-California studies confirmed miso's anti-radiation effectiveness. That concludes part 2. Fermented foods catalyzed humanity's transition from barbarism to civilization. Humans sanctified them for rituals while finding cultural identity through them. All this stems from their nutritional or medicinal value, honed over millennia of use. Yet only in the last century did science explain fermentation's mechanisms. This brings us to our third question. How did science decode fermentation? Since antiquity, people sought to understand fermentation's cause. Early theories linked it exclusively to heat. Hippocrates and Aristotle believed stagnant water fermented into wine when heated. Medieval philosophers thought sunlight heated grape juice into wine. In 1763, Leeuwenhoek observed microbes under his microscope, but only in 1859 did Pasteur prove fermentation stems from microbial metabolism. These microbes include bacteria, yeast, molds, and fungi. Yeast being single-celled fungi used in bread, beer, and wine. Over 1,000 yeast species exist, larger than bacteria, thriving in oxygen-rich environments. In anaerobic conditions, yeast produces ethanol, carbon dioxide, and other trace substances, like volatile esters, acetaldehyde, and alcohol. These give fermented drinks or bread their unique aromas and textures. Molds are multicellular fungi. Their spores can cause allergies or even toxins, but they also destroy pathogens, like penicillium mold, which makes penicillin for cheese, and aspergillus mold used in fermenting soy sauce and miso. Even though fermentation's secrets were unveiled, people felt fear and unease towards these newly discovered microbes. Before Pasteur discovered microbes, people thought illness and death came from divine or demonic punishment. And after Pasteur discovered microbes, they became the sole cause of human sickness and misfortune. So, from the late 19th to early 20th century, a hygiene movement led by society and doctors swept the Western world, quickly attacking fermented foods. People believed that just as we clean our houses, we should clean inside our bodies by making food pure and hygienic. However, fermented foods contain lots of bacteria and have strong smells and tastes. In modern society, neither people nor food should emit such odors. Fermented foods were labeled as barbaric, dirty, disgusting, and even dangerous. To strip fermented foods of their backward traits, people turned to science for intervention. From the late 19th century, food processing innovations emerged, like canning, pasteurization, and freezing, methods that kill bacteria or put them to sleep. Thus, under scientific intervention, fermentation, brilliant for millennia, faded, replaced by artificial methods, chemical yeast, and additives.
Take Camembert cheese, a French icon. Its brown or gray spots were seen as flaws or dirt, signifying rusticity and earthiness.
So cheese factories coated all cheeses with sterilizing agents. Then they inoculated them with cultivated mold to produce flawless white cheese. Over the past century, agro-food processing expanded massively, achieving food globalization. Industrial assembly line products replaced traditional natural fermented foods, stripping them of their unique character and personality. Industrial bread skips natural fermentation too. Using chemical yeast and additives creates fluffy but flavorless loaves. Buttercream isn't allowed natural fermentation anymore. Additives mask the gap with traditional fermented cream's taste. The result? Wherever we go, we eat identical things with bland, monotonous flavors. But things shifted after entering the 21st century. People are abandoning full-scale industrialization, pushing for global food diversity. Interest revived in natural, local, eco-grown foods and ancestral fermentation methods. Since fermentation stems from microbial metabolism, each thriving in unique environments, only returning to origin sites can restore peak flavors. For example, American cheesemakers flock to France to train in traditional fermentation techniques. Meanwhile, new experiments emerge. Top Nordic chefs use ancient techniques on novel ingredients. Lacto-fermented plums, rose petals, even pea-based miso replacing soybeans. They even collaborate with universities, creating the Nordic Food Lab to integrate global fermentation wisdom. Traditional fermented foods are slowly returning, finding new balance with modern industry. That brings us nearly to the end of Neither Raw Nor Cooked. Fermented foods transcend mere nutrition. Imbued with civilizational meaning, they've ascended altars, entered collective memory, and woven human networks. As long as humans ferment, these foods will endure. All right, that concludes our journey through Neither Raw Nor Cooked. Find reading notes below the audio. See you next time.